over.
Thank you for that introduction.
You're welcome.
As you can tell, we are pretty informal. We love to chat with you all, and we would love to make this session as engaging as possible. I think we're lucky to have small numbers in the sense that we could really have some rich discussion if you all are up for that. And I know that it always makes an hour fly by when people are talking to each other. So, being on Zoom and not in person, please feel free to do whatever you're most comfortable with to get our attention. I'm from a small rural community, so you can just holler at me if you want to say something and just come off mute. Or you're welcome to use the chat box, whatever you're most comfortable with, or the reactions. Emily and I are both really informal whenever we give this presentation, so feel free to engage with however you feel comfortable. But as Quentin said, my name's Kristen Martin. I'm the program administrator for early childhood mental health at the Department for Public Health, and I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist. This is one of the programs that I oversee statewide. Emily is actually our main direct content and one of our lead trainers, but I've been involved with this work since it came about in 2015. Luckily, I was an early childhood mental health specialist at the time when these work groups were formed, and the training was really coming to life. So it's been really exciting to see the progress over these last several years. But today we're really going to be focusing on exploring the purpose behind the 6 guiding premises and address why those are best practices for professionals to fully understand how to embed the protective factors framework in your work with children and families every day. We know that with your job that you all are experts in the protective factors framework. You literally are building protective factors in children and families daily. But we really wanted to highlight those premises as well because they're equally important and make our job building protective factors easier if we're doing a really good job utilizing those guiding premises in our work. As you hear about those guiding premises, I guarantee you're able to like check off all the ways that you do this on a daily basis. But what we always tell people is it's so important to be intentional with how we're utilizing the guiding premises. We're all human, and sometimes we are better at some than others. And so the first thing we can do is just have that awareness and intentionality behind applying these in our everyday practice. So overall, Kentucky Strengthening Families teaches us how risk and protective factors are generational. Therefore, it's important that we learn how the continuum of protective factors work at every age. So when we talk about strengthening a family, we're talking about supporting the babies, the young children, the youth, and the parents in the home. Something that we've heard over and over again when we talk about strengthening families work is it's like this nice little box where everything good that you're already doing fits right inside. So for example, Kentucky Strengthening Families doesn't replace anything you're already doing. It validates the why for why some of these things are working really well. But then it also, on the flip side, helps us to understand why maybe some of the things we're trying aren't working very well. So I always like to start with our goal and vision. I think that's really important to know what we're about to really look at this framework. But this is a statewide program to improve healthy development and well-being of individuals and families by engaging families, programs, and communities in building protective factors to mitigate stress and adversity. So we have several goals, but our main goal is that Kentucky is strengthening families by enhancing protective factors that reduce the impact of adversity and increase the well-being of children and families through family, community, and state partnerships. Our vision is that all Kentucky children are healthy, safe, and prepared to succeed in school and in life through families that are supported and strengthened within their community. So this is all about not doing two families, but we realize that families are the one constant presence in a child's life, and any support or guidance we offer has to be within the family unit, within a community providing that strength and support. So the Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative is built upon 6 protective factors. So that's where our framework is unique from the national model from the Center of the Study of Social Policy. They focused on 5 protective factors. When we brought this work to our state, Kentucky decided that nurturing and attachment was extremely important to the success of an individual. So we added a 6 protective factor, which is really neat about our state. Emily's actually going to dive deeper into these 6 protective factors, so I won't touch on those yet. But at its core, strengthening families is a child abuse prevention framework. Evidence has shown that the presence of these protective factors strengthens families and reduces the incidence of child abuse and neglect. So the 6 protective factors promote stronger families, which then reduce the impact of adversity and increase the well-being of children and families. So you all are actually the first to see our brand new visual. I don't think we presented on this or shown this yet, but we have a new visual for showing all of the programs under the Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative. So this is exciting. But you can think of Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative as the umbrella or overarching goal on how we're going to strengthen families in Kentucky. And underneath that umbrella are several curriculums that incorporate the components of the Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative. And the reason for that is because each of these programs include one or more, could be all 6, of the protective factors. So these curriculums are Family Thrive Training, Youth Thrive Training, Parent Cafes, Provider Cafes, and Youth Cafes and Connect the Dots curriculum. We actually have launched our Youth Thrive training today as well. That's happening in Frankfort currently as we speak. So that's another exciting thing that we have going on. So now we want to talk about the difference in risk factors and protective factors. Risk factors refer to the stressful conditions, events, or circumstances. It might be something like depression of a family member, substance use, family violence, even persistent poverty, that increase a family's chances for poor outcomes. And this includes child abuse and neglect. Protective factors are the conditions or attributes in individuals, families, and communities, or the larger society that mitigate risk and promote healthy development and well-being. So put simply, they are the strengths that help to buffer and support families at risk. Protective factors balance out the impact of risk factors. So the more that we have on one side, the more we either move towards positive resilience or negative vulnerability. So in some cases, as you all know from the work that you do every day, we can't lessen risk factors in a family, but we can always, no matter what the circumstances, build up protective factors in families. So in other words, the more protective factors present results in positive outcomes and well-being, less difficulty with stressful conditions, and a decreased chance of child abuse and neglect. In many ways, Kentucky Strengthening Families was our state's response to the astounding findings of the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. You can also hear people reference that as the ACEs study. This happened in the 1990s. We got those results and we were like, now what do we do? Like, this is very alarming. Like, what are we going to do to best support families? And we decided to focus on prevention. And so there's many categories. I'm sure that you all are aware of the ACEs study. If you're not, feel free to email us. We're happy to send you more information, but there's many categories of adverse childhood experiences. And as we know, the higher the ACE score, the greater the risk of experiencing poor physical and mental health and negative social consequences later on in life. So this was the first study to really open our eyes to how stress and trauma in childhood have lifelong impact, but also how significant that stress and trauma is for all families. So, in recent research, this was one thing that gave me lots of hope. I was a therapist at the time, and I often say like that the FRYSCs of the school are the angels of the school, because I would have never been able to see all the kids that I needed to see in a school without the help of the FRYSC. They really got me in and helped me get to the kids that needed my assistance. But whenever I heard about the ACEs study, it was just really it was hard. It was hard for me to see that data and that results and then be like, now what do we do about this? So what I always say is PACEs are the hope side of this research. And this is something that we can really focus on and do and see a positive income or outcome from that. So there's been a shift of focus from just focusing on adverse childhood experiences to focusing on the importance of positive childhood experiences. And positive childhood experiences are activities and experiences that enhance a child's life, resulting in successful mental and physical health outcomes. So, simply put again, positive childhood experiences are protective factors. According to recent studies, positive childhood experiences may even counter the damaging effects of adverse childhood experiences. So, what can we do? One, we can offer more positive childhood experiences to all kids, giving them that opportunity to help grow resilience in children who are then able to become healthier adults. Adults who learn to trust the support of social connections, which is linked to adult mental health, and then also children who then become adults who can seek support and get care, have improved symptoms, even if mental health issues are present. So now, as I mentioned before, we're going to take a little dive into our 6 guiding premises. We're going to spend a few minutes reviewing these, but as I said, we have lots of materials on this. So if you're interested, we're happy to send you more or get you signed up for a deeper dive into a training to learn more. But these really provide the foundation for us as individuals to truly grasp the meaning of the Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative within our interaction with children and families. So, like the description reads, guiding premises guide our work. Individuals are best supported by those who incorporate the 6 guiding premises as their foundation. So, in turn, we will then be better equipped to promote the 6 protective factors within our work. So, one example of this is if I understand what it means to have a strength-based perspective, strength-based is one of our premises that you see on this slide, then I'm going to be better equipped as a professional to connect with the families and the children I serve by first acknowledging what all they are doing well and right before I focus on an area of growth or improvement. The whole family can truly benefit from this type of connection. Families are more motivated to make helpful changes when they feel connected to the person helping them or their service provider. So now we're going to look at the guiding premises and how they connect to the protective factors. So we can look at how these concepts are aligned by thinking of how the protective factors, if you see on this visual, they're the leaves of the tree, and the guiding premises are the roots of the tree. So this visual shows us the connection between the protective factors and the guiding premises, and also helps to explain how the guiding premises lay the foundation to understand how to incorporate the protective factors into the work that you do every day. So now we're right at our first premise, which is self-awareness. Being self-aware means realizing the importance of practicing self-care regularly. Self-care is not selfish. It's the most powerful tool that we have in our own home and in ourself. So I know that you've heard the saying a million times, you can't give what you don't have, or you have to put your oxygen mask on before you help someone else put on their mask. These concepts illustrate what we know that is true about self-care. You can't help others if you don't help yourself first. Sometimes adults in general struggle with this. If you're a parent, I know you struggle with this, but especially if you're a helping provider, we all seem to struggle with this. We focus on telling other people how important it is to take care of themselves, and then most of the time we neglect taking care of our own selves or putting that practice into play in our everyday lives. But we know that people are best supported by others who understand and recognize the importance of self-care and self-awareness in their own practice. I always talk about when working with families, it's so important to use the concept of the 5-to-1 rule. You see that listed on your slide here. And all that means is 5 positive interactions to every 1 negative interaction. And it doesn't, it really focuses on if you're going to target an area of growth or something that you want a family to improve on or work on, try really building them up with 5 labeled praises or acknowledging 5 things that they're doing really well already before we even engage in that growth area discussion. So for someone to feel satisfied and feel connected in a relationship, we have to focus on increasing those deposits or positive interactions and minimizing those withdrawals or negative interactions. Our next premise is strength-based. People are best supported by professionals who focus on assets and use strength-based family and youth-driven approaches. So being strength-based means we recognize the things that are going well and work to build on those first. So this builds from the premise before. We want to recognize a person's strengths and honor those strengths. Engagement and involvement improves when we focus on those strengths first. This can also increase a person's motivation to make necessary changes over time. People need to feel like we are their advocate and we truly want them to succeed. When other people are in the driver's seat when it comes to their goals, they're more successful in the process. They have that buy-in that's needed to make a change. And if you think about even in your own personal life, I want you to think about how you embrace this practice in your own work and home. And next, think about how you can encourage this thinking or approach with the people that you serve. If you notice this little visual on your slide, you can see that it talks about a characteristic or a characterization and a positive quality, like how you can shift those to a positive quality. I really challenge you to look at those characteristics and see how you might shift some of those in your mind to a more positive quality. Sometimes when we are able to change our own perspective to focus on more positive qualities, we are able to then see more positive outcomes from that as well. Then next we have relationships, which basically means people attached to people, not programs. What I always say is you can have the best program out there that helps so many people, but if the person receiving the service doesn't feel connected to an individual that's a part of that program, the program's not going to be successful. People are best supported by individuals who understand that attachments, connections, and relationships are a primary source of growth and learning. It is relationships and through our use of relationships that we learn and grow. So relationships are essential to changing people's lives. It's important that others feel a real connection to someone before jumping in and talking about hard things for their family or whatever the identified problem is. Engagement and progress towards goals decrease when a person doesn't feel connected to a service provider or when they're not in the driver's seat during that process. So our next premise is race, privilege, and power. People are best supported by individuals who understand the role of race, racism, and bias, and the ways in which race, other identities, privilege, and power shape an individual. I love this graphic. We changed this probably 6 months to a year ago because I feel like this is just a really powerful visual to explain what all of this means. But this visual is from the Interaction Institute for Social Change. It's a wonderful visual that shows the differences between equity and equality, giving 3 individuals an equally sized crate to stand on without considering their original heights or how tall they are, while equal is not particularly helpful or meaningful. Alternatively, when taking equity into consideration, someone with a smaller stature is afforded 2 crates to stand on, helping this person be able to see the game. Although this above graphic helps us to understand individual differences, it doesn't take into account the root source of inequity. In both images above, the students themselves are the source of inequity. Their different heights allow them different access to being able to see the game. But let's be realistic here. The students' heights aren't causing them to be unable to see the game. The fence is. The next image from the center of the story-based strategy offers a third category, justice. Like the image suggests, these practices are those that dismantle the sources of inequity in the first place. So while this often may be beyond the peer view of our teaching practices, teaching students to recognize these inequalities may be the first step in creating a larger cultural change. Our next premise is trauma-informed. People are best supported by individuals who understand the need to use trauma-informed practice methods. Trauma response focuses on building resiliency. Trauma-informed care refers to the recognition of the pervasiveness of trauma and a commitment to identifying and addressing it early whenever possible. Trauma-informed care also involves seeking to understand the connection between presenting symptoms and behaviors and the individual's past trauma history. It involves the provision of services and interventions that do not inflict further trauma on the individual or reactivate past traumatic experiences. So some things that I think about when I'm talking about being trauma-informed are doing something as simple as using trauma-informed care language when you're speaking to other individuals. I hear you, I believe you, and I support you. Everyone within your organization or community should be trained on trauma-informed care as a best practice. Since we know trauma is pervasive, everyone who comes in contact with individuals needs to be trauma-informed too. And our last premise here is culturally responsive. So people are best supported by individuals who are culturally responsive and take into account their own culture and the culture of the individuals and families and communities that they serve. So we have to remember that everyone has a story to be told. An example of a way to be more culturally responsible could be as simple as doing your own research and knowing the various cultures in your school community. Research their unique culture to better understand the practices and beliefs. The whole goal here is to make sure that everyone feels included and valued. So when we change our lens or perspective, we change our attitudes or the ways we look at families. When implementing Kentucky Strengthening Families, our focus shifts from a focus on a family's deficits and risk factors to a more positive focus on their strengths and skills that every family has. Our focus shifts from focusing only on providing services to at-risk families to thinking about how we can build strong relationships with all families, because all families face stress and adversity at times. Our focus shifts from thinking we need to fix families to the acknowledgement that families know their children best. This means that we respect families and work with them instead of doing to them or for them. Implementing Kentucky Strengthening Families means we don't make the mistake of understanding the critical importance of children birth to age 5. Instead, we acknowledge that the majority of brain development takes place in the first 5 years, and we act on this knowledge by doing all that we can to support families of young children because we know it makes a difference for the child. And finally, instead of focusing program resources and efforts on the neediest families, we focus on making small but significant changes in our everyday actions and interactions with all families. So let's take a closer look to see what we mean by being strength-based. So when we look at people through a negative deficit-focused lens, we tend to see problems, make negative judgments, see only their fault, and expect negative outcomes. But when we change our lens, replacing the deficit-focused lens with a strength-based lens, we see solutions, inherent strengths, opportunities, and what's already working for that family. So the real goal is to help families bounce back to move forward. The 6 guiding premises provide the foundation to the Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative that help us understand and recognize the importance of promoting the 6 protective factors into our work with individuals and families. In other words, people who embrace the 6 guiding premises are better equipped to help families bounce back to move forward when faced with adversity. So now I'm going to hand it over to Emily, and she's going to talk more about the protective factors.
All right. Thank you, Kristen. Okay, so we are going to jump in and just do a brief overview of the 6 protective factors of Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative. And I know that this is not new information to you guys, since your standards of quality do embrace the protective factors framework. And so you live these protective factors daily within your work. So as we go through the protective factors, I would love to have some engagement and hear from you guys, if it's either unmuting yourself and sharing or putting in the chat box. But I would love to hear how you are incorporating some of these protective factors within the work that you're doing. And so we'll do just a brief overview, and then we'll have a little bit of a interaction discussion about it. So really, to understand the meat and potatoes of the Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative, we really are going to do like just this brief overview of the 6 protective factors. So Kentucky Strengthening Families Initiative has chosen this tree logo to really represent our goal. So you can see the leaves on the tree represent the protective factors. And you can think of this idea as what we need to do is think back to that visual with the guiding premises of the roots of the tree, and protective factors are the leaves of the tree. And so us as professionals, as individuals, if we embrace those 6 guiding premises within our work, really use those as guiding premises, then we're going to nurture this tree and help these leaves grow. So we're helping that individual grow their protective factors. So the first protective factor I want to talk about is nurturing and attachment. And so like Kristen said, this particular protective factor is unique to our state here in Kentucky. The national framework only incorporates the 5 protective factors, and Kentucky really thought it was important to really take this snapshot of what it means for children to have like this nurturing, this attachment with an adult, and make it its standalone protective factor. So when we think about nurturing attachment, our tagline here is that families, or we can even exchange this to individuals, ensure children feel loved and safe. And so we know from research that nurturing is really a critical life skill that, when present, can provide children with that foundation that they need to become caring, respectful, and cooperative adults. So this foundation of nurturing and attachment is established during those early years, usually between like birth through age 3 or birth through age 5. It's really important during those years for children to have a healthy attachment with a supportive caregiver. And we also know from research is that when children do have that nurturing bond or that nurturing attachment, that it helps their brain architecture. So we're really providing those positive experiences to young children that are impacting their brain development, which is pretty important stuff. So this little definition from the American Academy of Pediatrics states that these things must be met in order for a child to feel loved and safe. So think of these not just like our basic needs like food, clothing, and shelter, but physical needs, and being able to listen. So when children are in a situation where they feel heard and they feel like they're a part, that they matter, then that's when children feel loved and safe, that we're encouraging them, that we're fostering their independence and self-worth. We think of discipline, and we think of discipline, I'm not talking about like physical discipline here. I'm talking about ways that we can teach children. So we as the adult need to coach children and teach them appropriate ways on how to handle situations. So children have to learn those things. It doesn't come natural to them. We have to teach them. It's our responsibility to teach them how to do that. They need to feel like this unconditional love, that they do feel love. And also tradition is very important. But you know what? Let's be honest here. We as adults really need these things as well. So in some ways, we can incorporate these things into the work that you're doing. And I would like to hear how you're doing that. So if you wouldn't mind to kind of unmute, or maybe you can put in the chat box. So when we think of this nurturing and attachment and providing a this positive experiences with young children, how are you incorporating this in the work that you're doing within the school districts? Or if you work with older children, how are you promoting this sense of nurturing attachment with the families that you're working with?
Emily, you have in the chat here, Tara said Christian County does a lot of programs with preschool and our local health department. We make sure our parents and families know how their children grow and what they need to grow at a young age. It's a great example.
Yeah. So you're kind of hitting on the next protective factor that we're going to talk about, which is knowledge of child development. So by providing parents and caregivers the educational tools that they need to understand how their child's developing is considered a protective factor in itself. Yeah. Any other comments? Well, one way we can do this is being a responsive adult. So, with young children, so children learn to depend on us as their caregiver and to help meet their needs. So, this is how we can ensure that children feel safe by responding to their needs and establishing that sense of trust. It looks like there's something else in the chat. We treat all children with respect. Yeah, absolutely. So, going back to that concept of when we think of discipline, I mean, that's part of it, like teaching appropriate management and coping skills is part of what we do to establish trust and routines. So attachment really is the greatest need of young children. So children need to feel this sense of positive attachment with an adult to feel safe, so they can then be curious and kind of learn about what's going on within their environment and be ready to learn for like that academic learning. So the social emotional skills are very critical during the early years for children to establish the sense of trust and their social development, coping skills when situations get hard, and managing their big emotions. And then they're at a place where they feel safe to explore their environments. So, knowledge of child and adolescent development is our next protective factor. And really, what we mean by this is that families or individuals learn how their children grow and develop. So, I really like that comment that was in the chat earlier. By providing parents and caregivers information on how their children are growing in development, then what you're doing is you're helping that parent and caregiver grow this particular protective factor. Because when parents and caregivers know what developmentally appropriateness is going on, so these milestones that are going on with their child, then they're able to help them during situations. So for example, a young child having a meltdown, then we know that it's a developmentally appropriate for young children to have meltdowns because they don't have the skills developed yet to be able to manage those big emotions. It's our job as adults to teach them what those big emotions are and how to cope and problem solve and talk through those. So, with knowledge of child and adolescent development, we really mean here like having an understanding of child development and parenting strategies that help advance that positive development. So another reason why this particular protective factor is considered a protective factor is when adults have an understanding of development, they will be able to do these things that are listed on the slide, have accurate expectations, be better able to be empathetic and validate children and youth, and be able to have more patience with children and youth. So let's just talk a little bit about some more ways that you all are kind of incorporating this particular protective factor of knowledge of child and adolescent development within your work with young children or with families. So I would love to hear how you're doing this. If you wouldn't mind to unmute, or you can put it in the chat box. So what you see here on the screen, so these are some ways that we can support this protective factor of knowledge of child development. Just simply talking with children. Children are always listening and they're wanting to learn. So by talking with children throughout the day, this really is helping build that protective factor. Children really thrive on routines. And so when we follow routines, we're able to make children feel a sense of that safety and security. Children show we're showing children how to handle their big feelings, like those big emotions. And this one kind of goes into another protective factor of cognitive and social emotional competence of children, which is really helping managing those big and communicate those big feelings that children are having.
And
So
in
it
the
looks like,
chat, Emily,
yep,
sorry, I want to tell you the chat too. Brittany said relatives as parents programs, and they work on this topic specifically.
awesome.
So that's a really good example.
Yeah. So that's a particular like curriculum that you're using within your school. Yeah, and we can see here too that a lot of these protective factors really kind of cross over within each other. So I look at this next one, developing a positive relationship with children to promote their learning. I think back to those values of what that nurturing and attachment protective factor means, which is really having a positive relationship with a young child. And so by doing that, we're helping develop those positive relationships, which fall under this protective factor as well. And simply playing with children. So we know young children learn through play, and again, knowing that is a protective factor. That's part of those developmental milestones, and having that understanding of how children learn and grow. And so by just playing with children, then we're helping grow their resiliency and helping them grow their other developmental areas, which include social emotional competence. It includes helping them problem solve. It includes helping them learn how to cope with big feelings because we're working with them one-on-one. So another thing about like knowledge of child and adolescent development is when we think of child development. So let's kind of go on beyond through like those teenage and like adolescent years. And so we know that from adolescence to those young adult years, that brain functioning is getting more complex and growing into these skills of what we call like executive functioning. So, excuse me. Excuse me. So our frontal lobes are really becoming more developed. And so this is where like our problem solving part of our brain comes into play. And we also know that this part of our brain doesn't fully develop until we're in our mid to late 20s. So I think back to maybe parents or caregivers that we're working with, maybe if it's a young parent, if it's a teenage parent, or a parent in their early 20s that are still going through this process of their brain still growing and developing. So we know that the brain starts to develop these stronger connections again in the front part of our brain in that frontal cortex. And so that frontal cortex is responsible for functions that you see here: attention and working memory, planning and organization, forethought, and impulse control. So young people are really vulnerable to depressed moods, and that's something that we need to understand. And it's part of this developmental cycle of how brains grow. They're susceptible to the influence of maybe media and others. Adolescent changes occur during the body and brain. There's a lot of things that are occurring very rapidly, and so when I think of like a teenager or a young adult that's having like these really big feelings and they don't understand why, then how we can respond in those situations is a very, very positive experience and saying something like, yeah, I understand that you're having this big emotion and you may not know what's going on, but you know what? It's normal to feel this way. This is just your brain starting to grow and develop. Looks like we have something else in the chat. Let me check that. We do a newsletter for relatives raising students to keep them informed on resources and information at the local and state level. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So our next protective factor is social connections, and what we mean by this is that families have friends that they can count on. So it's really having those real connections with others, these true, genuine connections with others. So who are those people that we can call on when we are having a hard time? Who are those people that we can depend on, who are in our inner circle that we can call upon to help us when we're having like a really concrete need that we need to take care of. So we know that through relationships, we're able to build awareness on how these everyday interactions we have with families, youth, and maybe even our coworkers and with ourselves affect the quality of our work and the effectiveness of our programs. And I love this quote here on the slide that relationships are based on four principles: respect, understanding, acceptance, and appreciation. And so you can see here that this particular protective factor of social connections, excuse me, when we look back to those guiding premises of relationships and really understanding what that concept of having a positive relationship looks like, then we're able to really embrace those qualities to help this promote this protective factor of social connections with others that we are working with. So another thing that you see here, you already heard about earlier, that people connect to people and not programs. So people need to feel this sense of safety, both emotionally and physically, that they're treated fairly and they're not being judged, that they feel valued and cared about as an individual, and their family is cared about and valued. And they also need to feel empowered. So, here's some ideas on how we can support social connections, but I would love to hear what you all are doing. So, if you wouldn't mind to unchat or unmute, or you can put in the chat box, what are some of the strategies that you are doing currently within your program to help support social connections?
The chat yet, Emily, but I just thought a lot of FRYSC that we know across the state are doing parent cafes. And then also now several are starting youth cafes. So if you're doing any kind of cafe, that would be a lot of the protective factors wrapped up in one, but definitely for social connections. Melanie said family cafe.
So when you are speaking of social connection, are you asking about my relationship with the parents themselves or my relationship with the students?
Both. Yeah, so when we think about this protective factor of social connections, we're thinking about how can we build these social connections with the students that you're working with, but then also with the families, so with the parents and caregivers. Because when we think of building these protective factors, we have to involve the family unit as a whole in order to achieve the goals and the outcomes that we want. And so both, it's building those social connections with the students that you work with the families, but then also your coworkers.
And I would even add in there, like, think about how you're building social connections and peers, right? We know that that helps kids be resilient. So are you giving them opportunities to connect with each other in a space? And then it looks like in the chat we're doing a Monday morning breakfast with each grade level for the next couple of months. So students can invite a couple of adults in their lives to come eat breakfast with them.
That's nice.
That's
Yeah,
very nice.
that's
And that goes into
great.
nurturing and attachment too.
Yeah, it's like they really do interconnect with each other. And I really love that idea because it's something as simple as just sitting down and eating breakfast together. But the benefit of doing that is just really remarkable. So children they feel comfortable with maybe having a conversation, like a face-to-face conversation with somebody else. They're talking about maybe engaging in a conversation of things that are important to them or things that they're interested in. And so we're really building their interest and like their self-worth by having those conversations. And I think there's something else in the
Yeah, in your
chat.
chat, I was gonna read it for
Yeah.
you. I don't always have my bar, so I can't always see it unless I'm checking it. But Brittany gave another example. She said they keep board games, card games, and puzzles in their office so that people can do them before school, during lunch, etc. So again, offering that opportunity for peers to connect with other peers. That's a great idea.
Can someone explain to me? I'm sorry, I'm new, you guys. Can someone explain to me what the family cafes look like?
Well, I'll share a little bit about Parent Cafe, because that's one of our models under Kentucky Strengthening Families. And I am going to do a little bit of a plug at the end of the training. But if you plan on attending the Fall Institute in Louisville, we are going to be there, and we are going to be doing a Parent Cafe session where we're actually going to be doing a full mock Parent Cafe that you can participate in. And this is something that we are having conversations with, like Melissa Newton, on how we can provide the Parent Cafe facilitator training to more FRYSC coordinators throughout the state starting next year. So I encourage you to attend that session during the Fall Institute. But Parent Cafes is a national model that really looks at having discussions around the protective factors. And that's why it's underneath of the Kentucky Strengthening Families umbrella, because it encompasses those protective factors. So it's not a training. It's really an experience for parents, caregivers to come, have a conversation about the struggles, the challenges of being a caregiver, but also the successes of being a caregiver as well with other parents. It's a safe environment. The hope is that these connections, we're building these social connections, which is why social connections, parent cafes fall under this protective factor of social connections, because it's an opportunity for parents to converse with other parents and maybe make connections because they have the same lived experiences. And so really a goal of parent cafes is that parents are developing these connections and they're able to connect with somebody outside of the cafe. And so that's one way that we are building these social connections through the parent cafe model.
And one thing I'll add to that too is that Parent Cafe is just the branded name because it's a national model. And so when we do this and when we're training other people and when you're advertising, you would want to say that you identify a parent as anyone that has a caregiver role for a child, because we want to be inclusive and we know not all families are made up of two biological parents. So that's just the name. So we have to use it since we use their model and have tweaked that. But yes, I do like the idea of like having it more family friendly too and inclusive of all different types of families.
So somebody else I put in the
Thank
chat.
you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Somebody else put in the chat, they do lunch and learns for each grade. And this is where parents and we provide some information for them. Then we're able to have lunch with their children. This gets them in the building and it helps build relationships. So I love that idea, like providing the opportunity to have like a meal together. So what can you do to kind of get parents in the building? And then you can start kind of working on building these social connections. So those lunch and learns is an opportunity to build social connections. So I love that. So our next protective factor is concrete support in times of need. And so with this is where we think of this as families get assistance to meet their basic needs. So when we think of this could look like access to resources that address a person's basic needs and that help minimize those stress caused by challenges. We also know, and we want to realize too, that when we have a need, sometimes it's hard to ask for help. And the reason why that is because it's not always easy. Maybe we think the person should be able to figure this out on their own. Maybe the access to resources is shaped by identities, life circumstances, and opportunities of individuals. And maybe there's some sort of effects of adversity from trauma. So we have to think too that the access to resources and maybe I think of maybe resources that are offered during like the day, and maybe parents or caregivers or individuals need support after hours. So so we have to make sure that we are providing those opportunities. And I know, because I hear about this through the work that you all are doing when talking with FRYSC throughout the state, that you provide those opportunities for parents and caregivers to be able to feel comfortable, not just during school hours, but really at all hours too, and during the summer. So you all really do amazing work. So what are some things that we can do to help make it easier for someone to ask for help if they need it? Here's some things that are listed, but I would love to hear from you at this time. Like, what are some creative ways that you are incorporating this within the work that you're doing with families and children to make it easier for that individual to be able to ask for help? And I want to share one example as you're thinking about this, or maybe type it in the chat box, that a FRYSC coordinator had shared with us. Is they do the food backpacks, and I probably am not saying it correctly, but it's the food backpacks. And they noticed that the children were not, in this particular school, that the children weren't utilizing that program. Well, for whatever reason, maybe it was the stigma behind it. And so what they ended up doing, that FRYSC coordinator ended up doing, was talking to the basketball team. I think it was one of the sports teams, and the sports teams, like the athletes, came in to take the backpacks as well. And we're really kind of talking it up with other people, like in the hallway. It's like, hey, did you go get your backpack? Why don't you have your backpack with you? Like, I got my backpack. And really kind of neutralizing the situation. And so they saw an increase. And so I really think about how creative that was to make that situation where it was easier for that child or that parent to ask for help. They were working from a strength-based perspective. They were making it flexible and available, and they were providing a different, better experience for that child. So does anybody else have like an example they would like to share? Put it in the chat box if you do, but I do want to move on because I know we're getting short on time. And so I want to cover our next protective factor of cognitive and social emotional competence of children. And this is where really families and individuals teach children how to have those healthy relationships. So it really means here that what we're doing is that children are able to experience, manage, and express the full range of positive and negative emotions. They're able to develop close, satisfying relationships with others, including their peers, other children, but then also adults. And they're able to actively explore their environment and learning. So what I think of before any of this can really be achieved is we have to establish that sense of that first protective factor we talked about with nurturing and attachment, and children feeling this sense of security and safety and love before we're able to get to this step of helping children experience, manage, and express their feelings. Okay, so the last protective factor is parental and youth resilience. And so this is really where families are able to bounce back in order to move forward. So we know everybody experiences stress from time to time. So resilience is that process that everybody needs in order to manage those stressful situations. And it helps us ensure that they and their families are on the right path to healthy, positive relationships and outcomes. So resilience doesn't mean that things are not going to be hard, or things that are not always going to be hard. Things are going to be hard. It's not going to always be easy to get over certain challenges. What we mean by resilience is that we, as an individual in our family, we're able to have those resources to get through those challenging situations. And we do that by building relationships. Relationships are really the foundation for building resilience. So you can see here how these guiding premises of relationships and our other protective factors of social connections and nurturing attachment all really mend together and they build on each other. So we have to have those positive relationships in order to build resilience with individuals. So when we help children build their resilience, children are able to feel connected. So they're able to feel this sense of belonging, to gain opportunities to learn about how to have good relationships with others. They learn which people to go to and when they need help. So this is where I want to put a plug with our Youth Thrive and Youth Cafe program. We are also going to be doing a session at the Fall Institute on Youth Thrive and providing like some application on how you can incorporate protective factors with youth and adolescents. But when I think of youth cafes, it's that parent cafe model, but the audience are youth. So it's an opportunity for youth to have conversations with each other around protective factors. So they're building their social connections. They're building their social and emotional skills when they're able to feel connected, which in turn is building their resilience. It's an opportunity for young children to learn how to have good relationships with each other by having those true conversations with others. Okay, so this is where I want to kind of share a little bit about our sessions at the Fall Institute. So Kristen and I are going to be presenting on the first day of the Fall Institute, November 8th. Our workshop on parent cafes this is where we are actually going to be doing a full mock parent cafe experience. We're going to go through and actually facilitate the cafe, and you as will be participants in our cafe. So the reason why we're doing this is because the next step is really to schedule some parent cafe facilitator trainings throughout the state. And so we wanted to have you guys experience that cafe model so you have that understanding. And then when you go through the parent cafe TOT, you really kind of have the buy-in because you were a participant in the cafe. So our parent cafe workshop is on November 8th, the 2:30 to 3:45 slot. And then directly after that, we are going to be doing a workshop on empowering youth to thrive using those protective factors in Youth Thrive and Youth Cafes. And that session is going to be from 4 to 5:15. And so we received some feedback because we did both of these sessions at the Victory Over Violence conference in July. Our parent cafe session really went into an overview of what that parent cafe model was. And so we're building upon that overview by providing a mock parent cafe experience during the Fall Institute. So our session at the Victory Over Violence on Youth Thrive and Youth Cafes is really an overview, kind of understanding what that model is, what we mean. And so what we want to do for the Fall Institute during this session is really talk about application. So we presented an overview of what this means in July. So in November, when we do this, we really want to we want to take it up a notch and talk more about application, because that's the feedback that we received from you all that attended the Victory Over Violence conference, is you wanted more application. And so that's what we're going to be providing in November. I think we're at time. So am I correct? Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Thank you guys for hanging with us today. I know this is a lot of information to throw at you within an hour, but this is really just kind of a sneak peek and overview of our session on Family Thrive and premises and protective factors. So just so you know, our typical training is 6 hours, not 1 hour. So it's a lot of information that we've condensed into this hour for you guys. We hope to see you all in November at the Fall Institute and talk with you all some more and learn ways that we can help support you guys in the future. So I'll turn it over to Kristen and Quentin.
I'm going to put our email addresses. I just realized we didn't have a slide at the end, and you all need to know how to contact us. If you have any other questions, I'll let Emily drop hers. Please feel free to reach out to us. if you have any other questions. And oh, well, there it is. And hopefully we'll see you in November. Quentin, do you have anything to tell them?